All right. Welcome to the Rise Up podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Mitchell. On this show, I do my best to help simplify everything that goes into the weight loss process, especially by helping you learn to get out of your own way. And this is something I genuinely enjoy getting to do. Even if I never speak to you, I hope I'm able to even make a small impact in your journey. And I just want to kind of start things off, going over today's episode with really helping you understand the way that you really just keep your results for life, for the long term. And it comes it comes from understanding like who you are. This is a bit weird. This is a bit strange, but I like to remind people that weight loss and fat loss are a lot more emotional than logical a lot of the times. And there's those people out there who could just take the information and run with it and see and create awesome results. But a lot of information doesn't really solve a lot of the emotional, psychological problems that many people face. And it's not the fact that you're broken or anything like that, but it's really the core of behavior change. The core driver of behaviors in general is who we believe we are. And this is something I did a presentation on at the beginning of the current challenge. We're halfway through it right now, early August of 2023. So whenever you're listening to this still holds true. The way that we see ourselves is it really it could really make the process a lot more difficult than it needs to be, right? And really, I want you to start understanding what you want, what you say you want to accomplish, and how often you're always finding a reason to not stay consistent or letting life get in the way of those goals, and you choose to give up because of it, right? Or at least temporarily stop chasing it, and wait till the next time you get motivated to pick it back up again, because these things that this process that you find yourself in are often because there's two people fighting in your head, to decide which choice that you want to make, the version who you currently are. And I like to refer to this as the negative voice or the little voice, whatever that voice is, that likes the way things are. Our body and our mind really, really hates to change. Even if it's detrimental for our health in the long run, our body and our mind will get used to whatever we tell it to do, whether we're aware of it or not. So it will always make a terrible situation bearable. And that's usually the part of us that makes mindless choices or uses food for comfort and undermines all the progress that we're making, or the part of us that doesn't feel like what we do is good enough and always tearing ourselves down. That's the part that we get used to being. And that is suppressing who we want to be, who we want to identify as the real us, the real you that's been suppressed for so long, that gets frustrated or feels guilty when you make a decision that doesn't really align with you, right? And when it comes down to it, right, if you're always saying that you want something, yet you always turn around and do something different, more knowledge isn't going to fix your problem, right? You need to address the real problem of the situation and look at who you see yourself as. Who do you deep down believe that you are? And it goes throughout this process, right? The process of understanding who you are now is usually just becoming self-aware, right? Who you are and how do you behave. And then when you kind of look at who you currently are, and even though it may be hard, right, we want to accept it. We want to say, okay, this is who I have been. This is how I've been showing up. And no, I don't like it. No, it's not helping me get to my goal, but it is who I am currently. And once we accept it, right? And people get really weird about acceptance. They think it's an admittance of failure. It's like, no, if we can't accept who we have been, right? And we always try to run away from it or suppress it, it will always find a way to come back out. It's the same relationship that a child will have if you're always telling it no over and over and over. You're telling a child, you can't have it, you can't have it, you can't do this, you can't do that, right? So when we constantly avoid accepting who we are, that current version of ourselves will always find a way to prove itself right, that you can't stay consistent, that you aren't good enough, that you always fall off, and instead of messing up once and forgetting about it and moving forward, it'll make you feel like you have to keep messing up. And it's like the analogy: if you pop a tire on the road, you don't get out and pop the other three, right? You would get out and fix it. But that's usually who we are when we actively suppress it and don't accept that concept of who we have been, right? Because if we get clear on who we are now, we can start changing we can start identifying what needs to change to become who we actually want to be. This identity process, right? You need to get abundantly clear on who you are, right? And this is what gives us, or who you are, who you want to be, and where the gap is, right? What are the problems that you face that really make it hard for you to show up the way that you want to, right? Because that's who we need to start acting like, right? The whole logic of fake it till you make it, that's pretty accurate. Because after a while, after you start faking, after you're faking it, even though you may not believe that the identity is you, after a while, after a long while, you'll have accumulated so much proof that you are that person that you say you want to be, that your brain will start to believe it, right? But it has to come from awareness first. Build awareness. But I don't have a visual right now, but I really want you to understand like how to work this self-concept, this current version of you, and really understand where this version of you came from. Because after we have that self-concept and we have that idea of who we want to be, right, we need to accept and understand where we got our current behaviors from, right? There is no behavior that we do that we didn't pick up from somewhere. We didn't learn it from somewhere, right? For most of us who struggle with emotional or stress eating, we weren't born to be stress eaters. We didn't come out the womb choosing food to solve our problems. We learned it from somewhere based off the environment that we were in, based off what we were conditioned to believe. And for example, right, this is a story I share very often. My childhood was tough, right? I didn't control a lot as a kid, right? My father figures were a revolving door, and the ones who did stick around, except for kind of later in my life, taught me that violence, abuse was how you solve problems, right? And so abused my mother, abused me, abused my family, and I could have easily believed that that was how this was supposed to go, right? But that was something I chose not to, thankfully, not to believe, essentially. But what I did learn from my mom as I've gotten older is that she's a very narcissistic, very everyone else has a very hard time taking accountability for her own actions, right? She's done a lot better, right? I don't mean to throw her under the bus, right? It's just what she had me when she was really young, and she was doing the best with what she could, right? But she wasn't aware of her own struggles when she had me, and that's okay, right? We have a much better relationship now, but I just understand that the reason why I was so self-defeating, or I never felt good enough, or I would often turn to anger for my problems, was because I was conditioned to believe that. I was given those things, right? And we're often given an identity, behaviors, beliefs that are not our own, right? And when we get abundantly clear on who we are, right, and we start understanding where we got it from, it makes the building the bridge to who we want to be a little bit easier, right? Because if we can identify and understand, oh, I'm not a piece of shit for using food to solve my problems, right? Mine was I had a lot of mental struggles, but I also really loved candy, because as I was trying to deal with my emotions as I was growing up, I would often turn to Reese's or Skittles. I love Skittles now that I realize I haven't had those in a while. But chocolate is my main go-to. And I would often, and still do, have hard times when I'm stressed, when I'm emotional. I will turn and find the closest thing to candy to help me feel better, right? And again, when we overconsume calories and we have health goals and we choose food to solve our problems, this is a part of us, who we are, that is making it hard to be who we want to be. So we need to identify these patterns and where we got them from, right? Because when we're aware and we understand the patterns, right, this gives us the ability to the belief, I should say, that we can change our conditioning, that we can change who we have been, and to inform form the habits, the behaviors, and the beliefs that will allow us to be who we want to be. Right. Because when we identify, understand the triggers, the environments that we were in that gave us a lot of these behaviors, and you don't have to have a like a tragic backstory like I do. Right. It's not even that, there's a lot of people who have it worse than I did. Right. But it's not about comparison. It's about you've developed beliefs and behaviors from somewhere. So let's just understand where they come from. A lot of people have a hard time going back to imagining some tough times in their life, right? But that's often where a lot of this stems from. It doesn't have to happen when you're a kid. It can happen when you're an adult. It's just about getting clear on where it may have started, right? You don't have to have the exact answer. I only know where mine comes from because I've had to do a lot of work. I spent years understanding myself, therapy, self-help books, coaching, so many other. I spent so much time trying to figure this out, and I'm doing my best to save you that time, to give you the ability to start looking around in those areas in your own life and see if you can start identifying your own patterns and where they came from. Because when we understand where our patterns developed, we can start pinpointing and catching the triggers that remind ourselves of those situations. Right. So if you often turn to food for comfort, and you understand that it was a time where you couldn't control much, but food did make you feel better in those moments, then anytime we're in a very similar environment, our brain will think it's the same environment. We're the only creatures on this planet that can think something, and our body reacts like as if we're there. It's amazing, and it's also very detrimental because trauma can be very real, even though we're not in that environment anymore. And that, when we understand where we got the behavior from and why when that trigger happens in our life as we're adults, right? Why we turn back to that behavior to quote unquote solve our problem, then we gain the ability to take and remind our body, our mind, that, hey, it's okay that we want to respond this way, but we're not in that environment anymore. So we don't have to respond the same way that we used to, right? This is another less serious, less emotional response is people have a hard time throwing away their food. And a lot of times they were kids, they were taught that there's starving kids in Africa that would love to eat that food. So they have this relationship that they have to always finish everything that's on their plate. My wife actually struggled with this for a while. And it's not because, and this often makes it hard for people to stop when they're full, and it's much easier for them to overconsume calories, especially when they have a weight loss goal that feels like it's hard to do, and that they feel like they're fighting against themselves because somewhere when they were younger or somewhere along the line, they learned that they have to finish their plate. And that core memory bleeds into adulthood, right? So the concept of throwing away food is detrimental because when you were a kid or whenever you learned it, right, it was a punishment for it. It was a scolding. There was ridicule, maybe, right? So that pain, that fear of going through that again is worse than saying, no, I'm full, I'm done eating, right? Knowing that it goes against our weight loss, our health goals. Because the person we are is still identifying with who we were back then when we learned that behavior, right? But when we start identifying that trigger and understanding where we got it from, it's like, okay, I'm no longer in that environment. I don't need to respond this way anymore, right? It's on automatic because we've practiced it for so long. We believed it, right? It became a part of who we were. But when we're trying to become the person who shows up for themselves and doesn't have the same struggles of always feeling like they have to eat their food, always feeling obligated to say yes to food, right? We get to look at that environment and say, great, this is how I usually respond. This is how I want to respond, right? If I'm full, I want to be okay with putting my food back or putting it away and being done with it, right? Because I'm no longer in that environment. This is the process of changing your identity, understanding, and more importantly, accepting who you are now, where you got your beliefs and your behaviors from, and then stepping in and addressing those struggles, because these are the things that diet plans, that workouts, they don't fix. This is what the problem really is. If you in the industry, it's like people are so focused on the physical of getting people in and out as quickly as possible, They don't actually look at the person and what they need and what they've been through. This is why so many people will go and lose weight and it doesn't last. I want people, my biggest pet peeve is to help them understand why. If they understand why they behave a certain way, then they can catch it. Then they can actively change it. This is the key to sustainability, because just because we get good at identifying the pattern and then we practice a new one instead of choosing food when we're stressed or emotional, right? We go for a walk, we journal, we read, or we breathe, or we do anything, right? One of my clients who struggles a lot with emotional eating, she loves dancing, she loves listening to music, so that's something that she's practicing and focusing on. Whenever she feels the need to eat, she's going to do her best to catch it and replace it with music or dancing or something like along those lines, right? When we get good at that, right? It doesn't take all of those beliefs that we struggle with, it doesn't take it away. There are still times where we'll still want to turn to food for our problems, to turn to something else that is holding us back from getting to where we want to go, because it's what we practiced for so long. So we have to practice the new pattern over and over and over again. Even when you get to a point where you don't have to think about it as much, right? It doesn't go away. And I'm saying this from experience. I still oftentimes have to fight myself from eating when I'm stressed, right? I'm not perfect, right? I didn't completely eradicate it, but now I'm much better at catching it, identifying it, say, this is what is causing my stress and anxiety right now. And I want to eat food, but I know it's not going to solve my issue, because it's going to go against my goals that I have for myself. It's going to add extra calories that will make it harder for me to maintain my physique, my goals that I wanted to achieve, right? I oftentimes tell my clients that the crazy people are the ones who don't talk to themselves. Right. We're oftentimes talking to ourselves a lot. We're very negative. We're very guilt driven, or we remind ourselves of how guilty we should feel. Right. But it's talking to yourself rationally instead of emotionally, instead of negatively. Right. Everything that we think is totally valid because we believed it for as long as we can remember. Right. It's been our truth, but it doesn't mean it's the actual truth. And when we start to identify the pattern and catch the response, we get to change it into something that aligns with that identity that we want to be. We change our core, when we understand our conditioning, we change our core concept, our self-concept, and then we apply it to the results that we want to live, the results that we want to achieve. And then we look at the mindset and behaviors that get to those physical results. But if we don't start with these foundational pieces of conditioning and self-concept, if we don't accept who we are and where we've come from, no matter how many times you say you're motivated, no matter how many times you get a new diet plan or a new workout program, you will always revert back to who you deep down know you are, no matter how successful you are. I've seen it countless times, people losing over 100 pounds, and then within a few years, they gain all the way back because they were only focusing on the external, the behaviors, the motivational mantras that are constantly everywhere. Yes, we need to remind ourselves a lot about why this matters. But if we're not using those reminders to help change our self-concept, change who we believe we are deep down, then no matter how much you say you want something, you will always find a reason to make an excuse or to go back to who you believe you are. And that's not fair to who you want to be. And it's also not fair to beat yourself up for who you are now, because a lot of times you didn't ask for it. You didn't ask to be negative to yourself. You didn't ask for the environment that you were in that gave you certain responses that whenever you're in those situations in your adult life, you revert back to who you were in those environments, right? Because our brain is so good at protecting us. It's so good at remembering situations that it could cause damage and harm. So it's prepared, right? This version of us who we are, who we've been, right, is trying to protect us. It's trying to help. Because I want to kind of go over this really quick. That relationship or that behavior that we learned, it helped us get through a really tough time. Whatever it was, it helped us then. And it thinks it's still helping us now, but it's not. And this is why we feel like we're contradicting ourselves, why we're so frustrated, why we feel so guilty when we make choices that don't align with us, because we keep reverting back to somebody like a child version of us, a younger version of us that had no idea what was going on, but was just trying to make it through. And when we give that version of us some understanding, some kindness, say, thank you for your input. I appreciate you trying to help. But right now, you're making it harder for me to live the life that I want. You're making it harder for me to get the goals that I want. So I'm gonna need you to put you in the back seat. I need to be in the driver's seat right now. And instead of us turning to food, we're gonna turn to a walk. We're going to turn to water. We're going to turn to reading, whatever it is, whatever genuinely. And this is what I love to ask my clients when they struggle with emotional eating. What are other things they like to do to help them feel better that don't involve food? So now their brain's thinking of different patterns or different things to help for when that situation, that trigger pops up. And now they're reinforcing and practicing that new identity. So now their brain starts thinking differently. It starts moving away from I'm the person who always turns to food to I'm the person who will prioritize myself the best way that I can in that moment. I will not turn to something that makes me feel worse. I will not turn to something that hasn't helped, that hasn't worked. I will turn to something that genuinely helps me feel better. And that creates the belief and the start to create a new identity. This is what I do with all my people who live in their heads all the time. They struggle so much with the mental side, and I help them start making these connections. And eventually, a big part of why this is so hard, it's hard to track like how much progress you're making, because eventually you'll just be thinking differently. You won't have as much of the negative response. You'll be able to make the choice that genuinely works for you more often, a lot quicker, without the negative drawbacks of it. Right. But it takes time. And it's hard to track, like, am I making progress? Because a lot of times if it's very difficult to have these conversations, these rational conversations with ourselves. But when you do it consistently, eventually you stop thinking about it. It just happens. And you start showing up, and the behaviors that give you the body, the goals that you want, they become easier because you're no longer self-sabotaging yourself unknowingly. You changed who you thought you were. You changed the self-concept because you gave it understanding. You gave it you told it it's okay for what it's trying to do, but now you need to be the adult. You need to be the parent and take care of yourself the way that you need to, so that you get the results that last. If we don't do this, if we don't address the identity, who we believe we are, by understanding where we got our current behaviors and why we have them, right? The results that we get don't last. And that's my biggest pet peeve. And trust me, I've been there. I've been there where I thought I was doing everything right and things didn't go the way that, and I didn't get results. I've been there when I literally was doing everything right and I got results and I felt miserable because of it. So I didn't change my identity. I constantly stayed the same emotionally, mentally, with my identity. And that is the scariest thing for people. Because if they change so much on the external, but they still feel the same on the inside, it feels like a waste of time. But I've tried to save you that time. So this is what it takes to see results that last. You have to change who you think you are. And if you're constantly doing things that contradict what you say, there's probably an identity issue that you need to address, at least a mental hurdle that you need to cross that will help you start making even more progress that you won't unknowingly undermine. But yeah, I hope this helps. This is like I said, this is something that I genuinely love talking about, love teaching, and I hope you found it helpful. I hope it helped you even in a small way, and if it did, it helped you make some connections, if it helped shift your perspective, if it helped just give you some clarity on some things. I really appreciate it if you shared it with just one person. My entire goal is to help as many people as I possibly can, and even if I never get to speak to you, I hope I get to make some sort of impact on your journey and help you be the person that you know you want to be. And if you want to see more of my stuff, go ahead and check the show notes down below. Also leave a review of the episode of the podcast. I think that's a thing now. I've steadily started getting reviews from people and I really appreciate it. So, it really helps the show grow, and I really appreciate the growth that I have been seeing from everybody who continues to listen to me. So thank you so much. If you're a longtime listener, a new listener, or a current or old client, I appreciate you no matter what. And if you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm always happy to help. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the next one.